Mishnah, Mishnah Kuchaf Talid Omid base Kol HaKelim Nitolim Shabbos Shivrei Nitolim Imahem, and then so a keli which is nitol b'Shabbos, whatever exactly that means, but it's takeable on Shabbos. It's not movable on Shabbos. It's not Muktza in some ways. If it breaks, it's also not Muktza as long as as long as it has some function. And then the Mishnah gives the example of Shivrei Areva, the kneading trough, and which can be used for the slab of wood that comes off the trough. It seems that their kneading bowls were made of wood that can be used to cover things, can cover a barrel, and Shivrei Zechuchis can be used to cover a jar. Glass shard can be used to cover a jar. That's the Halacha. Rabbi Zobin says, no, it's not enough that they can do a melacha. They have to be able They have to be able to do something that was part of their original melacha. So just to summarize, because we need to use this as a launch pad from the last year, which was unfortunately a little bit of a while back. The first ha'ara on the Mishnah is when it says Kelim hanitolin b'Shabbos, Shivreim nitolin imahem. Does that mean that a keli shemalachto le'issa, this halacha doesn't apply to? Now the argument would be that a kli shemalachto le'issa, even though the sheva is roi lo-melechas heta, and therefore you would argue that the sheva shouldn't be muktza at all, because the sheva, the break, the shard, has now got a klishim, is now become a klishim l'achta leheta, but it can't become, the sheva can't be more muchan than the original kli, and more than that, since it's a klishim l'achta leheta le'issa, maybe the sheva is also mechama l'tzel. In other words, the whole Mishnah that says that the sheva isn't mukta is maybe talking about a klishim l'achta leheta. A klishim l'achta leheta is so omeid for any hishtamshus that's even omeid for a hishtamshus that its shards get. A keli is my slave; it's there omeid completely for my hishtamshus, and therefore, if it breaks, so it's omeid for the hishtamshus of the shard of the broken fragment. But a kli shemalachta le'issa, yes, it's a kli. It's omeid for tzorich guf, for tzorich makomo, but it's not omeid for being broken. That's one argument you can make. We saw that the Rambam Pashtus doesn't hold like that. It's not a knockout blow, but the simplest understanding of the Rambam, when he references Shivrei Tanu, that Motor Netaltelon, is that they are a kli shemalachta le'issa. And the Rambam on that maybe elaborates and says, that the very point he's trying to make is that not only is Shivrei Kli Shemalachto Issa, does the Sheva inherit its parent's status, but it actually becomes better than the parent. So even though the parent was a Kli Shemalachto Issa, the Sheva can be a Kli Shemalachto Heta and be mutter completely. How can it make sense that the Sheva is more muchan than the parent? The answer is because it's a kli. Even a kli shemalachta issa is a keli. It's still my slave. It's still muchan for everything. It's mukta mechama letzel because it's not omeid for any use on. It's not omeid for use on Shabbos, but it's mutter l'sorich guf l'sorich makomo. And if it breaks and it now becomes a kli shemalachta leheta, the Rambam, the simplest reading of the Rambam is that the Rambam would argue that that it now becomes kli shemalachta leheta. The truth is, this is also the simplest reading of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah talks about Areva, and Areva B'Pashtus is a kneading trough, which B'Pashtus is a Kli Shemalachto L'Issa, because you can't knead on Shabbos. And that's the simplest understanding of the Mishnah Berurah and the Biur Halacha that we looked at last time. That seems to be the point that the very point that the Mishnah Berurah is making, the Biur Halacha is making, that an Areva is a Kli Shemalachto L'Issa, and nonetheless the Heta applies. So that was point number one, really, that we made last year. I think maybe even that's all we got up to in the last year. I don't know if we went further than that. Adam?
We lose the flow of the Mishnah by doing Gemara.
Yes.
So
yes. It's a serious point, this, by the way, in terms of chaburah.
Just go Mishnah after Mishnah.
Yes.
It would be very interesting because some of the Mishnah the color Kelim refers to the Kishat Lisa and the Heta.
Yes.
Some refer to plus the Heta. It's just the point really. I just wonder what
It's a problem. Yes. It's not clear cut. It's not even clear cut whether and I did reference the Tosis at the beginning of the period to make this point, whether Kol HaKelim Hanitolin is the same as Kol Kelim Nitolin. Kol HaKelim Hanitolin means all Kelim which are nittel, as opposed to Kol Kelim Nitolin means all Kelim can be taken. So in the Girsa in the first Mishna, which says Kol Kelim Nitolin, it's telling us that no Keli is Muktza. In other words, even a Kli Melachot Issa is still nittel because it can be used to circle for the social gomer. All it's excluding is Kli Melachot Muktza Machmas Saran Kis, which ceases to be a Keli effectively. It's with respect to Shabbos, it's like a stone. That's one reading of the Mishnah. So yeah, there's much that's unclear here, and I think it's a fair point.
This apparent difficulty of Kli Melachot Issa converting into Melachot Heta once it's
Yes.
converted. Because the idea is that the Kli Melachot Issa, once it's broken, it's no longer, it doesn't have a function as Melachot Issa. And then therefore you say, well, the Shivrei are not going to be used for Melachot Issa.
Correct. So yeah, that is the succinct summary of the story. It's a very beautiful piece of, it's a very beautiful chakira to hear both Sadodim. You could argue that Kli Melachot Issa, the Shever Keli can't be more muchen than the parent Keli. Kli Melachot Issa is not omeid for Melachas Heta. So how can the Shever become less muktzah than that? Or you could argue a Kli Melachot Issa is a Keli. Kelim are fundamentally omeid for aren't muktzah. They're omeid for everything. It calls them on. There's a Kli Melachot Issa that takes it away from being from being omeid for everything, because it's omeid for something else. But that's happenstance. It happens not to be omeid for a melachas hata, and therefore it's also break it, and now it is omeid for melachas hata, so it becomes omeid for melachas hata. So I think that
by definition, no longer Kli Melachot Issa.
I'm agreeing with your strengthening. All I'm saying is that only makes sense if you understand that at root it's a kli. And a kli is full of infinite potential. It's a kli. It happens to be in a kli melachot issa. As Paul, you're saying now, it ceased to be melachot issa, so why shouldn't it be a melachot hata? And that is indeed the view of the Halacha and the Rambam, those who are lenient. The counter view, which is essentially the Mishnah brings the Prima Godin. Prima Godin brings both ways of looking at it. The counter view is, you're right, it's no longer omeid l'issa. But it entered Shabbos only muchen as a Kli Melachot Issa, so how can it become less muchen than that? Someone also mentioned, I don't remember who it was, or if this was my own or not, but the gears of the Mishnah says imohim. Was that your point? In the gears of the Mishnah, which most Kisayyados get rid of, but if it says imohen, it's a very weird Mishnah, which is why probably most manuscripts get rid of it. Kol HaKelim HaNitolin b'Shabbos, Shivrei Nitolin imohem. Their Sheva can be moved with them. It's not true. The Keli's history, there's no halacha that the original Keli has to be there when you move the Sheva. So what do you mean when you say the Sheva can be moved with them? A conceptual translation of the Mishnah, if you have that Girsa, would be the Keli can be moved with them, meaning it can be moved as much as they could be moved. In other words, it's coming good to make the point. The Sheva can't get a more muchen status than its parents, because that's a contradiction in terms. That would be the beautiful reading of that variant manuscript. Yeah.
On the
Sure.
first option,
Yes.
Is it correct then to summarize it as saying that actually Kli Melachot Heta, the term is anachronistic, and really there's only a Kli or a Kli Melachot Issa, and everything by definition is a Kli, and that's fine, unless it's got this extra status, it's dedicated to something that's Asa, and then we apply a new Issa to it. But once that's gone, then it reverts to the state of every Kli, and we use the term Kli Melachot Heta for convenient for really every Kli.
I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I don't want to categorically agree with you, because I want to process the idea. But I hear the point you're making, that in this model, what you're saying is a kli is a kli, it's muchen for everything, unless Kli Melachot Issa, which takes it away, narrows its realm of potential. Yeah. But by default, a kli is omeid for everything, and therefore, the Kli Melachot Heta is the default setting, as it were.
That's what we call it.
Yeah, we call it, but what we really mean is a kli. Yeah. I can see what you're saying. I just don't want to tie myself there without thinking through. But I hear your points. Yeah.
Could I ask, please?
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, Gary. Sorry. Yeah.
The language used by Rambam, Kol HaKelim, V'harehen kol hakelim shemlachtan laheta. That expression, kol hakelim, feels a bit weird.
I put it in bold because it is a funny turn of phrase. Gary's asking what's this phrase in the Rambam? Shivrei tanu mutter talton v'harehin kol hakelim shemlachtan laheta. The best answer I have to that question is he's coming to make the Halacha's point and the second possibility point. That's what he's emphasizing. He says an enormous chiddush. Shivrei tanur end up like all kelim which are melachot heta, even though you can't really call them a kli melachot heta because they came from a tanur which is kli melachot issa. But as soon as you remove the issa functionality, they revert back to maybe using shimi's nusach. They revert back to just being a keli, and therefore they're like a kli melachot heta. You can't.
Why didn't you just say they become a kli melachot heta?
It's not simple. Effectively, they do, but it's not simple to call them a kli melachot heta. They started off Shabbos as a kli melachot issa. I respect the irritation, the sensitivity, the bother that you're feeling in the language of the Rambam, because it's correct to bother you, and I'm coming from that bothering, and I hear your point that it still remains a funny turn of phrase. It does.
Thank you.
Again, Gary's point is an important point. Just to emphasize it, the language of the Rambam is strange. We need to be bothered. What do you mean harehin klisha? They are a klisha. They've become a klisha melachton. The half answer I have in this arichos in the language of the Rambam is he's coming to make our very point. But you're right.
I knew it was about Chavruta as well. It wasn't just me. That's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, there's a comment. Harry and to call a Kelim. They're like, okay,
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Harry to call a Kelim. Comments for nothing heta. Okay. Yeah.
Adam's point about not learning Mishna.
Yes.
We would get the imahem and see we've got delta there imahem, and so it's the language.
Right, but dalsatein we understood and we discussed. Yeah, but it's bad in this case. Dalsatein we understand the deles has to be with the mother Keli, but Shivrei the mother Keli is history.
The deles in my head was a specific additional point because you might have thought there's a problem of Muktza Issa to put the deles. That's what I saw. You to put the deles back onto the lead. There's a specific problem. Therefore, even in my head, but here is here it seems more
it's not superfluous. It's wrong. That's the problem. The imam, right? It's that the Sheva is not here. Yeah. Okay.
The lid as well. You don't have to only move it with the box. So in Mohan really means with the same din of the box. So it's like what the line said. It's the same din as the Shivrei.
No, it's not so simple, and this is what Adam said. Torah. I don't want to go into too much detail in Amud, but there's a number of possible explanations as to why the deles isn't Muktza. Possibly because it now has an independent function, but possibly because you can put it back on without transgressing anything, without it being binyan b'kelim, or possibly because actually there's cases where there's an issa floating around in which something would be Muktza because we're scared that you'll reattach it and so on. So there's other ways of understanding the imam. That imam. One reason could be like you, that it's a conception imam, yeah. But it's not when you learn that sukkah, it's not the only reason of imam. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. There's more to elaborate on that, but that takes us back to a previous Amud. I'll skim over that. The second horror, which I don't think we got up to in the last year, is in the case where they're not nitolin. So the Mishnah teaches us a din that a keli which still does me'ein melacha is nitol. If it does not do me'ein melacha, let's avoid the previous complication. A kli melachta leheta, which breaks and no longer does me'ein melacha, and therefore cannot do tiltal. Does that, in other words, it's also tiltal? Does that mean completely also tiltal, or does it only mean also mechama letel, but still not to the circle for the circle makomi? So sorry, just to elaborate a bit more on this, we will see shortly that a keli what is the keli which doesn't do me'in melacha? So the answer is let's say an areva which breaks, and the piece of wood is not large enough to cover a chavis. So what if it's not large enough to cover a chavis? Does that mean it's useless? I mean, you can still use it to cover a jar, a pihapach. So I printed in the source sheet the Ran, who says that the one. Did I print that? Yeah. Okay, it's the bottom page Ran community. Masechet Shivrei v'lechasos v'mesachavis pirish. Kol kach hashvarim gedolim shein ru'uyin lechasos chavis gedola. The pieces of wood that break off the areva are big enough to cover a whole chavis, a big barrel. But smaller than that, they're only usable as firewood. That covering is still called me'in melacha. They're only useful for covering a chovis. What does the Ran mean to say? That if they're smaller than being able to cover a chovis, they're only large enough to cover a pach. They're not a keli anymore. That's not called me'in melacha. Why? Because kanireh and other Rishonim spell this out. You only use glass to cover small jars. You wouldn't use a lump of wood. If you had a lump of wood, what you do? You'd throw it away for the firewood, which on Shabbos is not a use. So what that means is that a keli, again, just to be clear, the Mishnah says a shever keli that can still do a melacha is mutter l'taltel. A shever keli which doesn't do a melacha is osur l'taltel. Translation of doesn't do a melacha isn't that it couldn't do a melacha. You could use this scrap of wood to still cover a jar. It just means it's not normal. It's not omeid to do a melacha. So what is the status of this shever keli? Does the Mishnah mean to say it's osa mechamal itself, but mutter l'sorech kufa l'sorech makomai? Or does the Mishnah even mean to asa sorech kufa and sorech makomai? Is the point the Mishnah is making merely that it came from a kli shemlachta laheta, but it now becomes a kli shemlachta la'issa? Or does the Mishnah mean to say it ceases to be a kli at all? That's a textual question in translation of the Mishnah of osur l'taltel. Sorry, I see everyone's very hot and bothered about this.
You can understand the Mishnah to refer to three melachot and melachos in the one of them.
Yes.
Then you'd have to say it couldn't be that. It must not be able to use it at all.
That is correct. It's not necessarily consistent with the previous discussion. On the maths of it would somewhat depend on the previous discussion. Yeah.
It have to be both things.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Correct.
Can you explain this for how we even get this problem? Because why are we assuming the narrow scenario of it's actually only talking about Muhammad itself? And where does that spark come from? Normally we would approach the Mishnah. There's no indication in the Mishnah itself, which either in the first reading that it would be limited only to the case of Muhammad itself. Talking about using Kelim. So why would you say, well, actually only means this type? Even the Gemara itself doesn't seem to have a Kelim to it.
Because when the Mishnah says that you've got something which is mutter l'taltel and it becomes osur l'taltel. So is translation of osur l'taltel, whenever we see language in a Mishnah, the default setting is it's saying things precisely as they are and not going more extreme than is evident from the language. So if the kli shemlachta laheta is mutter l'taltel, when you say it's osur l'taltel, that the simplest understanding is it lowers things one level, not two levels. So osur l'taltel means you can't move a cell, but not more than that.
I mean, every time in this we really see osur l'taltel, we only have to think, well, actually, it's not osur l'taltel.
Well, maybe yes, maybe not. It might depend on where your starting point is. If your starting point is mutter, completely mutter mecham cell and the then osur l'taltel might just mean removing that one notch. Yes, yeah, that might be the diuk. Yes.
I don't understand what the Ron is drawing out from the Run, because it sounds like the Run is saying that wood is not used to fill up a pakshamen.
To cover a pakshamen, yeah.
Yeah, it just isn't, and
yeah.
Whether that's because it's not normal or be like putting a bundled up tissue in your wine bottle. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's weird, and that's not.
That's right. Yeah.
So it's not just that you could do it, but it's not normal. It's just you couldn't really. So isn't the Run then saying it's like twigs which are completely osur l'gamri? And that's basically saying it's only royal glass socket, saying it's useless unless you want to throw it in a fire.
I'm bringing from the Ran that when we say something is not oisin me'in melacha, it doesn't mean it's technically impossible to do me'in melacha. It just means it would be weird to do me'in melacha. I'm not being medayik from the Ran whether he means therefore it becomes like stones or whether it becomes a keli. I'm just translating the phrase. I perhaps foolishly, when I read the Mishna that Eino Osim Me'in Melacha, I thought it meant it's just useless. There's nothing you can do with it. The Ran opened my eyes to realize that 1 minute, you could use the wood to cover a smaller thing. And the Mishnah is saying, nonetheless, it has to be big, ready to cover bigger things. That means technically it still has a use, but nonetheless, since you wouldn't use it for it, therefore they're not Nitolim. But what's the translation of therefore they're not Nitolim? Therefore it's like a twig, Eitzim Avonim, and it's not a kli at all, or therefore it's Klishim and after the Issa. No, that's not the Ran. All I was bringing from the Ran is that Oisin Me'in Melacha means it's made for that, and not Oisin Me'in Melacha means it's not made for a use, even though technically it could still have a use.
It sounds like if one asked the Ran would say, no, you can't use this like that's not. I don't know why. I don't know what their jobs look like.
You need to do to prove that point. Otherwise, you're telling me Ran psychology. Yeah.
Sucker, meaning that you can't. It wouldn't be good for.
That's right. No, I hear your point, but all I hear in the Ran is that maybe I didn't even need to bring the Ran for this. It's really just the Mishnah, but maybe I just missed the translation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that this lump of wood is only not Muktza if it's big enough to cover Chavis. I want to ask you a question. Why should it be Muktza if it's big enough to cover Zuchafis? Why not? If you can use a shard of glass to cover not Zuchafis, sorry, a pach. If you can use a shard of glass to cover a pach, why can't you use a lump of wood to cover a pach? So the answer is you could, but you don't. It's weird. It's just not what you do. Translation, it has technically got other uses. It's just not only made for the other uses. So now I have a question. What happens if I do want to use this lump of wood for covering a jar? Why? Because I don't have anything else to cover. I'm desperate. What do we call that? Tzorich Gufay. Translation of Tzorich Gufay with the Klishim Lachtal Issa is a kli that you don't normally use it for that use, but you want to use it. This is a pen. Normally pens are used for writing. Why on earth would I use my pen as a doorstopper? The answer is I'm stuck. I want to hold the door open, and this is the only kli I've got. That's the het of Tzorich Gufay. Does the Mishnah and the Ran mean to say that Enochnami, of course you could, it's still a keli, of course you could use it as a door stopper, if you needed to, if you had nothing else, or as a pach stopper if you needed to. There's not made for that, and therefore translation in Halacha language, it's Muktza for the certain komoi, but also or does the Mishnah mean to say, as Shimi said, no, it's become a twig, it's become a stone, it's become something useless, and therefore it's Muktza completely. I think that's a good chakira. Whether you think that there's a diuk in the language of the Mishnah, or whatever, but the question is I'm not going to budge from the question. It's a good question to ask.
The song was even wider. The point is the circle was always used. I mean, that's even wider trade than the soil. Even you always got to use if it still maintains something. You need to move out of the way. You've got to sow it with Kelim.
Correct. Yeah, but I'm just, for our purposes, I'm just including that in the chakira. Yeah.
If that were to be the case, would there be a third scenario of things that were so small they really genuinely had no use and that they did become like
right? Yes, exactly. Yeah. You could imagine things that literally just become a splinter of wood would become a muksmach gufay. Yeah.
But that's not shot the Mishnah. You're saying Mishnah really says it's not really melacha. It's to say maybe melacha really doesn't mean this. What I'm saying, it's really so small it has no use at all.
Correct. Melacha means it's not made for use. That's what I heard in the Ran. Yeah, and I probably should have had it in the Mishnah. I didn't. I missed sort of what the Mishnah was saying. So the truth is, I did a little bit of sort of shuffling around the poskim and the achronim and so on, and this hits halacha l'maisa, this shayla, down to sort of Mishnah Berurah level. What actually the Mishnah means. All I will say for now is that, again, if we go back to our Rambam, it's printed the Rambam, yeah, and so on. The Rambam, I think, is Meduyuk, because the Rambam says that Shivrei Kelim are like a Klisha Melachton Leheta. Let's read the Rambam. Shiur Masechet Shabbat, Harin Klisha Melachton Leheta. So whether mats that get worn out still have a use, and therefore they're kli shemalachta heta. Shiuri begotim shabalu she'im b'hem shalosh al shalosh also the tantum she'einu ruin lo lanim v'rashim because they don't have ishtamshut. Shivrei tano is like a kli shemalachta heta. So I ask you, Rabbi Isai, in the Rambam when he's contrasting worn out clothes and a broken tunnel, which is a kli shemalachta heta, and shivrei machzalus, which is osa. What does he mean when he says it's osa? I think he means it's not a kli shemalachta heta, but it is a kli shemalachta issa. I think it's a doichik in the language of the Rambam to say that when he says osa, he means it becomes like Muktza machmas gufay. It's even osa so gufay. So I think the language of the Rambam is very clear that the Rambam is learning, like we're suggesting, that all the issa means here is that it's osa mechama l'tel, but it's still mutter l'tzorich gufay or l'tzorich mekomay. And again, I saw the poskim make this diuk because it's not my own diuk prima godom, and others it's also brought in the halachic works. I think I did mention last time in the share that I think I got myself into a little bit of a tangle that the Ramah, I did print the Ramah in yeah, I got good. Yeah, the Ramah is mashma not like this because the Ramah says that in here that this is on page 1, a third of the way down. Hagar if it got broken in a place where it could be mazik, then the Ramah says then you can move it in order that it shouldn't do damage. So the Prima Godom is Medayik in the Ramah. He says, 1 minute, why do you have to come onto a new heta of being allowed to move things so that they don't damage? Surely it's mutter l'tzorich mekomay. Elamai, you have a raya that the Ramah understood that it's osa l'tzorich mekomay, this broken keli. So that's the lay of the lands basically. Yeah. Okay. So that's the okay. So just to summarize, we're not left confused. We have a shaila in the reading of the Mishna. Does the Mishna mean to say that Shivrei Kelim that don't do a melacha are like stones, Muktza, even the or does it merely mean that they become a kli shemalachta issa? The language of the Rambam seems to imply the former, that the latter, that all it means is they only become like a kli shemalachta issa, and there's a diuk in the Ramah that seems to maybe implies that they become completely mutter. I want to say one more ha'ara on this, and with that we'll finish. Just so we've said something little new here tonight, which is the Gemara later. I don't know if people. I hope people have seen the Gemara later, even though we're not yet up to doing it. But Ian, the Gemara brings a story that Rava's servant wiped his shoes with this chaspa, with this shard of clay. And the Rabbanon were upset with him, fine, but Rava held its mutter. Why did Rava hold its mutter? Says the Gemara, Rava l'shatosai, who holds that even in a shasarabim, broken shards are mutter. What's the raya? Maybe the reason Rava held it was allowed is because he holds it's osa, but it's a sorich gufay. So the Gemara seems to imply, right? So you're using the shard to wipe mud off a shoe. That's a positive use of it. So you see from the Gemara, seemingly, that if we see Rava's servant cleaning his shoes with using the shard, it shows that he held that this is a Shivrei Kelim that is nitolin. What's the proof that maybe this is Shivrei Kelim she'ein nitolin, but ein nitolin simply means it's mutter l'sorich gufay. So you have a very clever proof, I think, from the Gemara that. Again, not my own proof, like the Prima Godom, everything I'm really saying now is the Cheshvan Prima Godom, because this translates to Halacha L'maisa. Again, are you with me? The Gemara wants to prove that Rava holds that in Rosh Hashanah, the broken lump of clay is nitolin. Why? Because you see that he allowed the servant to clean off his shoes with it. What do you mean? Maybe that's called ein nitolin and it's mutter because of the sorich gufay. So you see that ein nitolin means it would be osa l'sorich gufay, and that's in line with the psak of the Ramah. So that's sort of the cheshbon that. Okay, we'll stop here, and Amiat Hashem, this Sunday there will be a share. No more cancellation, hopefully. So let's see you all on Sunday.